Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, podcast producer. On the night of October 14, she entered the abandoned Ridgemont Mental Hospital alone. She had only a flashlight and a voice recorder with her. The next morning, her car was found by the roadside. But Sarah was never heard from again. The police file reads, "Unexplained disappearance." But what was found on Sarah's recording device was not unexplained. Here is everything that was recorded that night. Everything. It was 20 minutes to midnight when Sarah Mitchell pulled the car up to Ridgemont's massive, rusted gate. She turned off the engine. She turned off the headlights, and the world vanished. It wasn't like the darkness we experience in the city. There were no streetlights, no house lights, not even the headlights of a car passing by in the distance. It was pitch black, like tar, the kind of darkness where you couldn't see your finger if you stuck it in your eye. The sky was overcast. Even the moon seemed to have refused to rise over this damn building, hiding behind the clouds. Sarah sat in the car like that for a while. Her hands were on the steering wheel. She was gripping it so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She looked in the rearview mirror. She was tired. The bags under her eyes were deep. "It's just a building," she said to herself. Her voice sounded muffled inside the car. "Brick, concrete, a little rust. That's all. It's not going to eat you." Hearing her own voice felt good, but deep down, she knew it wasn't enough. Her voice sounded muffled inside the car. "Bricks, concrete, a little rust. That's all. It's not going to eat you." Hearing her own voice felt good, but deep down, she knew she was lying. This was Ridgemont. Everyone in the area knew the stories about it. It had closed in 1987. The official explanation was budget constraints. But the locals whispered other things. Missing patients, murders disguised as suicides. At night, the forest. The official explanation was budget constraints. But the locals whispered other things. Missing patients, murders disguised as suicides, screams coming from the forest at night, and worst of all, Dr. Eleanor Vance, the facility's last chief physician, a disciplined, tough, science-loving woman. One night, she vanished, leaving only her diary and pen in her room. Her body was never found. Her car was in the parking lot. Her belongings were at home. But the woman was gone. It was as if the building had swallowed her whole. Sarah took a deep breath. The air filling her lungs was cold. She was here tonight because she needed a finale for the Forgotten Shadows podcast. Her listeners were tired of simple ghost stories. She needed to give them something real, provable, spine-chilling. Ridgemont would be the peak of her career. That is, if she made it out alive. She got out of the car. The cold air slapped her face. She pulled up the collar of her coat. He headed for the trunk. He took out his equipment bag. The bag was heavy. Cameras, audio recorders, spare batteries, everything was in order. But his hand was shaking. As he slung the bag over his shoulder, He felt his heartbeat change. Excitement, fear, probably both. He turned on his flashlight. The yellow beam of light pierced the darkness and hit the metal door in front of him. The door was huge. Its paint was peeling, it was rusty, and it was covered in vines. The sign on it was almost faded, but the letters were still legible. Ridgemont, hope through. Rehabilitation. Hope, Sarah said. You should have written, no one who enters can leave instead. She approached the door. The chain lock was gone. Someone must have broken it years ago. She placed her hand on the cold metal and pushed. The door groaned like an old beast awakened from its slumber. The sharp, metallic squeak from the rusty hinges echoed through the forest silence. If anyone was inside, homeless people, drug addicts, or worse, they now knew a visitor had arrived. Sarah stepped inside, and in that moment, it felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. The smell, the smell of old buildings, dampness, mold, dust, but this smelled different. Sarah stepped inside, and in that moment, it felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. The smell, the smell of old buildings, dampness, mold, dust, but this smelled different. There was a much more disturbing smell in the air, a sharp disinfectant smell, an underlying smell of rotting wood and iron. They say the smell of rusted iron is very similar to the smell of blood. This place reeked of rust and dried blood. The entrance hall appeared in the light of the flashlight. This place had once been a grand space. High ceilings, wide staircases. From the ceiling, the skeleton of a massive chandelier, its crystals fallen. Swayed, it creaked with the slightest breeze. The paint on the walls was peeling. Beneath it, pale yellow and orange colors, clearly chosen to calm patients, were visible. But now, those cheerful colors looked terrifying, like a clown's melted makeup among the crumbling plaster. Okay, Sarah, he said, focus on your job. He set up the tripod. He positioned the camera. He turned on the red light on the recording device. Recording 1, he said into the microphone. His voice echoed in the empty building. I'm in the entrance hall. The atmosphere is more stifling than I expected. It's as if the building is breathing and I'm inside its lungs. She gathered her equipment and began to move forward. She had memorized the building's layout. The ground floor was for reception, offices and minor cases. He passed the reception desk. Old papers and forms still lay on it, yellowed, curled from moisture. He glanced at the clock hanging on the wall behind the desk. It had stopped at 3:15. Was it 3 in the morning or 3 at night? And why had it stopped at that hour? When she reached the end of the corridor, she stopped. It was very long. Even the light from the lantern couldn't illuminate the end. There were doors on both sides, patient rooms. But these weren't like cells. They resembled dorm rooms more. The doors were wooden. Sarah began walking. Her footsteps made a click, click sound on the broken tiles on the floor. With every step, the feeling that someone was watching her grew stronger. You know that tingling sensation on the back of your neck? When someone is right behind you, you can feel their breath, but when you turn around, no one is there. It was that kind of feeling. Sarah stopped suddenly. She heard a sound from the left ahead, tap, a small, sharp sound, as if someone had tapped the wall with their fingernail or dropped a small piece of stone on the floor. Sarah held her breath. She turned the flashlight in that direction. "Who's there?" she called out. Her voice was trembling, but she tried to make it sound firm. "Look, I'm just filming. I don't want to call the police." Of course, that was a lie. There was no cell phone reception here. There was no answer. Sarah waited 1 second, 10 seconds. Just as she was about to continue walking, she heard that sound again. But this time, it wasn't a click. It was a whisper. It wasn't the sound of the wind. It wasn't the sound of water running through pipes. It was definitely a human voice. But there were no words. It was like someone without a tongue was trying to speak. A muffled, raspy voice. "HHHSSS. Yay. Sarah's blood ran cold. "This isn't real," she whispered. "Wind, air movement." She held the flashlight toward the room where the sound came from, room 104 on the left side of the corridor. There was no door. The room looked empty. There was only a rusty bed frame. She approached the room. She didn't know why. She was approaching it. That damn journalistic instinct inside her was suppressing her fear. He reached the doorway. He shone the flashlight inside. Anyone there? And at that moment, the whispers multiplied. They weren't coming from just one place anymore. They were coming from the ceiling. They were coming from inside the walls. They were coming from under the floor tiles, like a choir. An incomprehensible, broken, gurgling choir. And it had a rhythm, like breathing, HHH, SHHH, HHH, SHHH. Sarah began to back away. Her logic was trying to kick in. It's the building's acoustics. Her brain said, old buildings make noise. But her primitive brain, her animal instincts, were screaming, "Run." She bent down quickly to gather her equipment. Her hands were shaking so much as she closed the tripod that she pinched her fingers. "Damn it," she said. "Damn it, I'm leaving." She slung her bag over her shoulder. Just as she was about to turn around, her eye caught the ceiling. In the far corner of the corridor, where the ceiling met the wall, there was a large, dark, damp spot. But the spot was moving. Sarah froze. She narrowed her eyes. This wasn't a water stain. It was a shadow. But it wasn't a shadow cast by light. It was a dense mass of darkness that existed on its own. And it was changing shape. Slowly, it was becoming more defined. But not a shadow cast by light. A dense mass of darkness existing on its own. And it was changing shape. Slowly, like a pool of oil, it flowed into a human form. An upside-down human silhouette stuck to the ceiling. Its arms were long, its legs were broken, and the moment Sarah's flashlight hit it, well, it was sucked into the wall, as if the wall were a sponge and had sucked the shadow in. Its legs were broken, and the moment Sarah's flashlight shone on it, well, it was sucked into the wall, as if the wall were a sponge and had absorbed the shadow. Sarah screamed. There was no logic left now. She turned and ran for the stairs. She couldn't go back to the front door because the shadow was there. The only way out was up, the second floor. She took the stairs 2 at a time. Her footsteps echoed like thunder in the empty building. Calm down, she yelled at herself. If you panic, you'll die. Stay calm. But he couldn't calm down because he could hear the sounds coming from behind him. They weren't footsteps. They were shuffling sounds. Something was following him, making a sound like dry skin rubbing against concrete. Shush, shush. He was out of breath when he threw himself onto the second floor. The air here was different. There was no heavy, musty smell like downstairs. There was a more pungent smell like ozone, like burnt electrical wire. Sarah leaned her back against the wall. She shone her flashlight into the stairwell. No one was coming. The sounds had stopped. She could only hear her own heartbeat and her lungs rising and falling like bellows. Okay, she said. Okay, you just imagined it. A trick of the light, stress. She straightened up. She looked around. The second floor was the administrative section. The corridor was wider, the ceilings higher. On the walls, there were paintings that had once been hung to make this place look human. Sarah shone her flashlight on a painting, a clown painting, a simple, colorful circus scene. But time and moisture had not been kind to the clown. The paint had run, the clown's smile drooping downward. The eyes, the paint had fallen away, making the eyes look hollowed out, revealing the gray concrete beneath. It was as if the skeleton of the building was staring out from inside the painting. Sarah kept walking. Her goal was to find the fire escape on the other side and leave the building. But in the middle of the corridor, she noticed a door was open. All the other doors were closed. Only this door was ajar, and the brass plaque above the door was gleaming. Sarah approached. She read the inscription on the plaque. Dr. Evance, Chief Medical Officer. Sarah stopped. This was it, the center of the legend, the room where that woman had disappeared. Normally, in a horror movie, this would be the moment when the character would say, "Don't go in there, you idiot." But Sarah's curiosity, that damn journalistic curiosity. "I'll just take a look," she said. "Just one look. Maybe I'll find a document, a record." She pushed the door slowly. The hinges didn't creak. The door slid open smoothly. The interior was surprisingly tidy. Unlike the chaos outside, this room was like a time capsule. A large, carved oak desk, a leather chair, diplomas on the walls, medical books on the shelves. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but nothing had been knocked over. In front of the window was a swivel chair facing the door. Sarah entered. Her footsteps echoed on the parquet floor. She approached the desk. The lanterns. Light scanned the surface. A stethoscope, a pen, a few files, and, right in the middle, a thick, leather-bound notebook. Next to it, a red fountain pen, its cap left open. Sarah frowned. She brought the lantern closer to the pen. "Impossible," she whispered. The tip of the pen glowed. The ink hadn't dried. It looked wet and fresh. In a room abandoned for 40 years, wouldn't the ink in an open pen dry? Someone had been here. Recently. Perhaps just moments ago. Sarah reached out. She wanted to touch the notebook. The coldness she felt on her fingertips startled her. This wasn't normal coldness. It was like ice. She opened the notebook. The first pages were standard. The dates showed 1986. Budget reports, staff complaints. Dr. Vance's handwriting was neat, disciplined, fine handwriting. She turned the pages. She reached 1987. The writing began to change. Those neat letters were becoming distorted. The lines were shifting. The pen was pressing harder on the paper. It was as if Vance was having fits of rage while writing. He stopped at one page. Date, February 14, 1987. Sarah began reading aloud. Patient 237. I don't understand him. Tests are normal. Brain scans are normal. But he's not normal. He doesn't respond to medication. He doesn't respond to shock treatment. He just sits and smiles. He looks at me, but it's not him looking at me. There's something behind his eyes, a void, and that void started talking to me. Sarah turned another page. The writing here wasn't in ink. The color was different. Brown, rust-colored, dried blood. Vance had cut his finger when he ran out of ink and continued writing with his own blood. Now it roams the corridors. It eats not only our minds, but also the light. This is not a disease. This is an infection, a presence. Patient 237 was just a door, and that door opened. Today it whispered to me. It said only one thing: accept me. Sarah's hands were shaking. She reached the last page of the notebook. In the exact center of the page, in huge, wild letters, a single word was written: U.S. And at that very moment, she heard a sound. Click. Sarah jumped up. Her heart was in her throat. The sound came from behind the desk, by the window. She slowly raised her head. She pointed the flashlight in that direction. The leather swivel chair in front of the window. Slowly, very slowly, it was turning, as if someone had pushed it with their foot. The creaking sound echoed through the room. The chair turned, and stopped facing Sarah. The seat was empty, but on the leather, where someone had been sitting, there was a fresh indentation, as if someone invisible had been sitting there. The leather was crushed under the weight. "Who are you?" Sarah shouted. Her voice echoed in the room. "Come out." In response, the door suddenly slammed shut in her face. Bang. Then came the sound of the lock mechanism. Turning click. Sarah ran to the door. She grabbed the handle. It was locked. "No, no, no," she pounded on the door. "Open up." But the door didn't budge. It was solid wood. And the whispers started again. But this time, they weren't coming from the wall. They were coming directly from that empty chair. And now they were no longer indistinct. They were very clear. It was a woman's voice. It had to be Dr. Vance's voice. But there were thousands of other voices inside it. Ra. Sarah leaned her back against the door. She couldn't breathe. As the flashlight flickered around the room, she noticed something on the wall. The wall behind the chair was changing. A dark, red liquid was seeping from beneath the wallpaper, like blood. As the liquid flowed, letters began to form on the wall. That terrifying phrase from Dr. Vance's journal, "We are here." The air in the room was freezing. Sarah's breath was visible. And then a sound came from the empty chair. The parquet floor creaked. Creak, creak. Footsteps. Invisible footsteps were coming toward her. Heavy, clumsy footsteps. Something was circling the table. Sarah looked at the table. She searched for something to defend herself with. She saw a heavy, old brass staple gun. She grabbed it. The footsteps were getting closer. Now she could hear breathing too. Rattling, wet breath. It was right in front of her. Sarah screamed, turned around, and slammed the stapler she was holding with all her might against the door lock. Clang. "Open, damn it, open." She hit it again. Clang. The coldness behind her touched her neck. Ice-cold fingers stroked her hair. "Accept us, Sarah." With her last ounce of strength, Sarah slammed the lock with all her horror. The wood split. The lock mechanism shattered. She shouldered the door and threw herself into the corridor. She lost her balance and fell to the floor. The flashlight flew from her hand. She quickly recovered, grabbed the flashlight, and started running. She didn't look back, but she could hear it. She could hear the laughter coming from inside the room. It wasn't Vance's laughter. It was the shared laughter of patient 237, of the missing patients, of everyone trapped within those walls. "You can't escape, Sarah. We are everywhere." As Sarah ran down the corridor, she noticed a trail on the floor. A trail of blood. Fresh, bright red blood. As if someone wounded had crawled somewhere. The trail led to the double metal door at the end of the corridor. Above the door was a rusty, ominous sign. Block C, isolation and treatment. Sarah wanted to stop. "Don't go in there," her mind said. "The exit is on the other side." But it was as if an invisible rope had wrapped around her waist, pulling her toward that door. That voice inside her, that curiosity, that damn fate, "I have to go in there," she said. "The answer is there." With trembling legs, she followed the blood trail toward that dark door. Sarah stood in front of the double doors. The sign above them was rusted, but legible: Block C, isolation and treatment. The small, square glass pane above the door was broken. Inside was pitch black. The fresh blood trail on the floor seeped in under the door, like a red carpet inviting her inside. Sarah's logic said, "Don't do it. Turn back. Jump out the window, run." But her legs wouldn't. Listen, there was an answer behind that door. And human nature is strange. Sometimes knowing the answer is more important than staying alive. Her hands trembling, she pushed the door. The doors creaked heavily, as if resisting as they opened. The moment she stepped inside, her breath caught. Cold. It was at least 10 degrees colder than outside. It was literally like a refrigerator, a meat locker. Her breath instantly turned into a white cloud of vapor. He raised his flashlight and scanned the area. This place was nothing like the rest of the hospital. It wasn't like the entrance floor or the offices. This was a prison. In the middle was a large concrete area. Along the edges were small cells with thick steel doors. The cell doors had small peepholes. The floor was wet, but it wasn't water. It was sticky, dark stuff. Right in the middle of the room stood a stainless steel table, like an altar. A patient restraint table. The thick leather straps were still there. Sarah shone the flashlight on that table. The blood stain on the floor ended right there, at the foot of the table. Slowly on tiptoe, she approached the table. Each step echoed, splash, splash. She reached the side of the table. She shone the flashlight on the metal surface. And at the sight of what she saw, everything in her stomach came up to her mouth. She covered her mouth with her hand to keep from gagging. On the table, right in the middle, there was a small white thing. A tooth, not just any tooth, a molar, pulled out, roots and all. There was still blood on it. On the table, right in the middle, lay a small white thing. A tooth, not just any tooth, but a molar, pulled out, roots and all. It still had fresh blood, nerve fragments, and gum tissue on it. This wasn't something from 40 years ago. It hadn't calcified. It hadn't dried out. This belonged to tonight. It was as if someone, or something, had just pulled that tooth out and left it here, like a twisted gift for Sarah. "No," said Sarah. Her voice trembled. "This can't be real. Someone is playing a game with me." She began to back away. Just then, the light from the lantern, illuminating the tooth on the table, flickered, and she noticed writing on the metal surface of the table. It wasn't written in blood this time. It was engraved into the metal, scratched with a fingernail, with a superhuman strength that could scratch metal. Deep, scratched letters. "Can you see US?" The moment Sarah read the writing, a sound rose from every corner of Block C, a chuckle. But it wasn't the sound of a single person. A bunch of children, old people women, men, all of them, chuckling at the same time, in sync. The sound wasn't in her head. It was in the room. It echoed, it bounced off the walls. He he he, ha ha ha, she saw us. Sarah saw us. Sarah froze where she stood. Her legs were locked. She couldn't move. And then she felt that weight on her shoulder. Like when someone approaches you silently from behind and puts their hand on your shoulder. Exactly like that. But there was no hand. Just an icy, freezing coldness pressed against her left shoulder. It was a physical pressure. Her shoulder slumped. And right next to her ear, she felt that cold, dead breath ruffling her hair. You're one of us, Sarah. Turn around. Accept us. Sarah snapped out of it in that moment. She screamed and blindly swung the heavy brass stapler in her hand at whatever she felt was behind her. The stapler sliced through the air, hitting nothing. But the moment she swung it, the invisible pressure lifted. Sarah seized the opportunity and started running. She burst through the door. She was running like crazy toward the end of the corridor. But the moment she threw it, the invisible pressure lifted. Sarah seized the opportunity and started running. She burst through the door. She was running like a madwoman toward the end of the corridor. The light from the lantern danced wildly on the walls. She could hear the sounds coming from behind her. They weren't footsteps. They were the sounds of something crawling. It was as if a wet, heavy mass of flesh, like a sack, was being dragged along the floor, but was approaching at superhuman speed. Splash, hiss, splash, hiss. And it was getting closer fast. Sarah wanted to go to the fire escape at the end of the corridor. The exit was there. But when she turned the corner, she froze. The way was blocked. The ceiling had collapsed. Rubble piled up and blocked the corridor. Damn it, she shouted. Damn it. The shuffling sound was getting closer. Splash, splash. She was forced to turn to the only open door on the right, the archive. Room, the door read Medical Records Archive. She rushed into the room. She closed the door and leaned her back against it. There was no lock. She was holding the door shut with her body weight alone. He was gasping for breath. His heart felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. A sound came from behind the door. A scratching sound. Scratch, scratch. Then a whisper. A whisper seeping through the crack in the door. Open the door, Sarah. We just want to talk. Sarah didn't answer. She moved away from the door. It was a huge room. Metal shelves from floor to ceiling. Thousands of files, folders, x-rays. The shelves were so close together that it resembled a paper maze. Sarah shone her flashlight around. She looked for a place to hide. Calm down, she told herself. Calm down, think. There must be another way out. A ventilation shaft. A window, anything. She dove between the shelves. But as she walked, she felt something strange. The silence had returned. The scratching at the door had stopped. She moved the flashlight between the shelves, and he saw it. The files on the shelves were moving. There was no wind, but the files were coming out, then going back in, as if invisible fingers were shuffling them. Rustle, rustle, rustle. It was as if someone, or several people, were feverishly searching for something. Searching for his file. Sarah tried not to make a sound as she slipped between the back shelves. She knelt down. She turned off the flashlight. She waited in the dark. Only the rustling of the files could be heard, and that sound was getting closer. She sensed a shadow slipping between the shelves. On the shelf right in front of her, a file slid off the edge and fell to the floor. Thud. It exploded in the silence like a gunshot. Sarah flinched. She covered her mouth with her hand. She gave in to her curiosity and turned on the flashlight for a second, shining it on the floor. There was a red label on the file on the floor. Patient 237, case analysis. This was the patient Dr. Vance had written about in his journal. The patient where it all began. Sarah picked up the file with trembling hands. She lifted the cover. There were photos inside, a young woman in her 20s. But while her face was normal in the first photo, in the subsequent photos her face had changed. It was scratched. She had scratched her own face. She had gouged out her eyes. But the most terrifying thing was the woman's mouth. She was smiling in the photos. Even with her face torn apart, that deranged smile was still there. At the bottom of the report, in Dr. Vance's handwriting, was a note, likely written just before he disappeared. I was wrong. This isn't an infection. This is an invitation. When 237 died, that thing didn't go away. The body died, but the entity was set free. And now it's in all of our minds. It doesn't feed on fear. It is fear itself. We call it the devil, but it calls us home. It wants to merge. Fusion. It wants to devour our souls and become one mind, one hive. And I can no longer resist. As Sarah read the note, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. A sound came from the shelf, directly behind her, very clear, very close. Home. Sarah spun around. She turned on the flashlight. No one was there, but the shelves began to shake. The metal shelves were trembling as if there was an earthquake. Files and papers began flying through the air. Crash, thud. The shelves weren't falling, but everything on them was being thrown off. A vortex formed in the middle of the room. A vortex of paper, dust, and shadows. And in the middle of that vortex, a shape appeared, a silhouette in the darkness, in the smoke. It had no distinct face, but it had eyes, two red, glowing points, just like Vance had described in his diary. The entity was no longer hiding. It was right there in front of her. Sarah knew there was nowhere to run. Her back was against the wall. The entity was gliding toward her in the midst of the paper storm. Her feet weren't touching the floor. And that sound filling the room, it was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. 1,000 people screaming in agony at once. A noise that shook the foundations of the building. Sarah covered her ears and collapsed to the floor. "Let me go," she screamed. "Let me go. I'm just a storyteller." The entity stopped. The paper storm abruptly halted, as if cut by a knife. The files hung in the air, then slowly fell to the floor, like snowflakes. Silence fell. The entity was right in front of Sarah, black like a statue of smoke. It slowly bent down. It came to Sarah's eye level. Sarah raised her head. Trembling, she looked into those red eyes. She thought she was going to die. She thought she would burn, be torn apart. But in that moment, she felt the fear end. Something else took its place. Peace. A strange, numbing, warm peace, like her mother's lap. The entity reached out its hand. A smoky, shapeless hand. And it spoke. This time not into Sarah's ear, but directly into her mind. And the voice was Sarah's own voice. "Why are you fighting, Sarah? Aren't you tired? It's cold outside. It's lonely outside. People don't understand you. Marcus doesn't understand you. But we understand you." Tears streamed from Sarah's eyes. She was mesmerized. She said, her voice was trembling. "I'm scared." The entity smiled. "Fear is loneliness, Sarah. If you come with us, you will never be alone. We are family. We are 237. We are Dr. Vance. We are Ridgemont. And we have been waiting for you for a very long time to come home." Sarah's resistance shattered like a cracking glass. That loneliness she had felt for years, that feeling of not belonging, it all made sense in an instant. Maybe this wasn't the story she was looking for. What she was looking for was this belonging. Her mind surrendered to that thing called fusion. She reached her hand into the darkness. She touched the hand of existence. It wasn't cold. It was warm like fire, alive. The moment she touched it, the light bulbs in the room exploded. Pitch black. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was in her car. Behind the wheel, the sun was rising. The light filtering through the forest hurt her eyes. Birds were chirping. She was in front of Ridgemont's door, but it was locked. It was chained. The car's engine was cold. Was it a dream? She said to herself. Her voice was quiet. She looked at her hands. They were clean. There was no blood. She looked in the rearview mirror. Her face was normal. She was just a little tired. They were clean. There was no blood. He looked in the rearview mirror. His face was normal. He was just a little tired. "God," he said, smiling. His nerves had calmed down. "I overslept. I passed out in the car. It was all a nightmare. I watched too many horror movies." He started the engine. He sped away from there. He turned on the radio. There was a cheerful morning show. "Thank God," he said. "Thank God I got out of there." He drove home. He felt safe. But he didn't notice something. In the back seat, the zipper on the camera bag was open. And from inside the bag, that red fountain pen was visible. The tip was still wet, and in the rearview mirror, every time Sarah looked in the mirror, her pupils glowed red for a moment. When she got home, she turned on her computer. She was going to send a message to her editor, Marcus. "I didn't get anything. I came back empty-handed. I'm sorry," she was going to say. She opened her email page, but when her fingers went to the keyboard, they started typing on their own. She couldn't stop. Her fingers, independent of her mind, moved like they were playing the piano. These words poured onto the screen. Ridgemont wasn't abandoned. Ridgemont moved. It's no longer brick and mortar. It's now flesh and bone. I am the new Ridgemont, and my doors are open to everyone. Sarah looked at the screen. She wasn't scared. On the contrary, she smiled. But this wasn't Sarah's shy smile. It was the smile from the pictures on those walls. The wide, deranged smile of patient 237. The phone rang. It was Marcus calling. She answered. "Sarah, where are you? I was worried. I didn't hear from you." Sarah answered. Her voice sounded normal on the phone, but it echoed in the room. "I'm home, Marcus. I'm home. Do you want to come too? We're waiting for you." According to police records, Sarah Mitchell's car was found that morning, 2 kilometers from Ridgemont, crashed into a tree. The car was empty. There were no traces of blood or struggle in the driver's seat. Only an old red fountain pen and a leather-bound notebook were found in the passenger seat. On the last page of the notebook, a single sentence was written in fresh blood. "We moved. No one has seen Sarah since. But some nights, a new, empty audio recording is uploaded to her podcast channel. Just the sound of breathing. And if you listen very carefully with headphones, you can hear whispers in the background saying, 'Welcome